What is the correct way to read the Dark Tower series and all of the related reading material? And is this necessary? In this video, I'm going to give you a list of pros and cons for extended reading order lists related to the Dark Tower series. Welcome to Dark Tower YouTube. My name is Michelle McEwen. I am your host. And here at Dark Tower YouTube, we do a deep psychological dive into Stephen King's magnum opus, The Dark Tower, talking about magic, mystery, metaphysics, picking Roland's brain, and just having a good old time. I've read the Dark Tower series 5 times at least, and most everything on the related reading list at least once. So I feel like I can have some opinions about this, and I'm going to share them with you. Why are we here? Why are we here? Because there are books that mention the Dark Tower. Sometimes a little bit. Sometimes it's a very direct link, like there's a character that shows up in this book that shows up in the Dark Tower, and then there's everything in between. So Stephen King even has commented on this phenomenon. In the afterword to Wizard and Glass, the 4th book in the Dark Tower series, he says, "I have written enough novels and short stories to fill a solar system of the imagination. But Roland's story is my Jupiter, a planet that dwarfs all the others, at least from my own perspective, a place of strange atmosphere, crazy landscapes, and savage gravitational pull." Dwarfs the others, did I say? I think there's more to it than that, actually. I'm coming to understand that Roland's world, or worlds, actually contains all of the others of my making. Okay, Stephen King. That's big. That's big. Wow. All of the other stories are contained within the worlds, plural, multiverse. Holy cow. So now we're like, woo, our heads are spinning. That's a lot of books that Stephen King has written. What are we doing with all of these books? And so Dark Tower enthusiasts make lists of all the stories and when you should read them, in and between, before and after the Dark Tower. And so, do you have to do this is kind of the first question on everybody's mind here. And my answer is no, absolutely not. This is not necessary. Why not? Because the Dark Tower is its own epic saga, and it contains everything within itself that you need to enjoy this story. It's already 8 books, 4,000 plus pages. That's enough, right? And we get everything that we need from our characters, the character arcs. And if we see things showing up from other stories, Stephen King tells us what we need to know. He's a great writer. He's not just going to throw something out there that makes no sense with a little footnote that says, oh, go read Insomnia and then you'll figure this out. He wouldn't do that to you. So just know that this is a complete journey in and of itself. You could have a great time reading it, be very fulfilled, satisfied, not feel like you're missing anything just by reading these books. So make your life easy, turn this video off, and just go read the Dark Tower books. Okay, well, you're still here, so you're wanting to hear a little bit more. Maybe you're undecided. You're interested in what I have to say, perhaps. So let us talk about pros. What are the good things about an extended reading order list for the Dark Tower series? Pro number 1, you love Stephen King. And anything that you've ever read by Stephen King, you love it. And so a list of Stephen King books that is more and more and more Stephen King books is like, yeah, right on. I'm into that. I could do that. And that excites you because it's fantastic reading. Pro number 2 and 3-ish are kind of along those lines where we're going to get more facets of King. We're going to see what a great writer he is. We're going to watch him evolve over time, apart from just his evolution over the Dark Tower series, which did take about 30 some years. So we're going to just get a lot of flavor of Stephen King, which is cool. Pro number 4, this is going to keep you busier for longer. So if you're looking for a massive reading project that excites you, you want to have something to read next for the next 2 years or however long it's going to take you, this is the project for you, let me tell you. So that could be a good thing for you. Pro number 5, this is your second trip to the tower, or your 5th or your 55th journey to the tower, and you just want to change it up. You want to do something differently. You want to bring in every single little reference that there is and put it in where it belongs and just have that experience. So that could be a great thing for you. And pro number 6, you can say that you did it. This is a massive undertaking. This is a lot of reading. 4,000 plus pages of The Dark Tower, plus, I haven't added it up, but you know, Stephen King books are not usually this. They're usually this. So probably thousands more pages that you're reading. And you got every single Dark Tower reference that there was. So you can get your Dark Tower Cub Scout badge and be like, I did it. That's worth bragging about, I think. So that's all cool. So you're listening to this and you're like, yeah, I'm in, I'm doing it. Let's do it. Okay. Now, what do I read first? And what's the list? And what's the order? Those lists exist out there. I'm going to make my own, and it's going to be a separate video because it's too much for this one. It's everybody's opinion. Unless Stephen King has written his own list, then this is just somebody's opinion. So I would just say don't get too mired down in this part of it. You want to start reading. So I'm going to, again, make a video about all of the other books. But to get you kind of oriented here, a lot of the books on this list have very little to add to the Dark Tower story. And you don't need to even think about them. I would kind of argue at this point, I don't just want to leave you hanging here. So I would say The Stand, Insomnia, Everything's Eventual, Salem's Lot, Hearts in Atlantis. Those are the books that are like, okay, you might see some characters sharing space in those adjacent novels. So that's what I would start with. And then what order? Let's go chronological. Let's make this easy and just say chronological, because as King's writing The Dark Tower, he's writing some of these other things, and that's where they fit, because that's when he wrote them. So anybody taking them out of chronological order, I would like to know the rationale. And I can kind of think of an example where one of the books that I just mentioned was published before The Dark Tower. So I would say, read it before you start. But they would say, why don't you just read it before that character shows up? Okay, all right. But it doesn't matter, okay? It doesn't matter. Like, as long as you read it before that character shows up, which would happen in chronological order, you're good. So just do chronological order. Make your life easy. I don't want you to get like super hung up so that you're just spending all of your time on Reddit, like comparing the different lists and what books are on this one and not this one in this order. You're losing valuable time if you're going to read all these books. Get with it. Just start reading. All right, but let's say this is maybe not sounding that great. So what are the downsides? What are the cons to these extended reading lists? Con number 1, not everybody loves Stephen King. I can't understand this, but I can understand not loving everything that Stephen King has ever written, because he's written a broad range of stories covering a lot of different topics. Some of them are very scary, and some of them are gross, and some of them are very uncomfortable. So I can understand somebody who's like, I don't love every Stephen King book equally. I would fall into that category. And if you're reading all of these adjacent books, you're going to find some that you don't like or don't like as much. And that's taking away from the vision and voice of the Dark Tower journey. For instance, I'm not a huge fan of The Regulators. I just recently reread this. So I even reread the books that I don't even particularly like because that's how much I love Stephen King. But rereading this book, I was kind of like, yeah, I can kind of see the Dark Tower tie-in, I guess, but it's pretty loose and peripheral. There's no direct this thing going on. Could I survive without this reading The Dark Tower? Oh, you betcha. And if I had stopped reading The Dark Tower to read this book, I would kind of be a little sad because this isn't as good in my opinion. So that thing is likely going to happen to you if you're reading this extended reading order list. Con number 2. Reading all of these different books might start to distract and take away from what's going on right in front of you in the series at hand. And I want to give an example from Game of Thrones. Have you watched Game of Thrones? It's a thing, right? Minor spoilers here. I'm not going to give away the ending, which, wasn't great anyway. But we have in season 1, I forget when, I think season 1, we have a character called Joffrey, and he mentions in passing the Princess Rhaenyra, this princess that lived hundreds of years ago, and he tells a little story about her, very short, couple of minutes maybe, and that's it. And then after that story, he moves on with his life and his character arc and their plot, and that's it. Now imagine someone said, hey, Princess Rhaenyra, she shows up in House of the Dragon. So pause Game of Thrones right there, and now go watch House of the Dragon because you're going to learn more about that character there. This shared character. So go do that. And you go do that. And guess what? Game of Thrones, House of the Dragon's a great show in and of itself. We have good characters and we're learning things and it's fun and all the things. And you watch all of that and you go back to Game of Thrones and now, okay, like you rewatch that scene with Joffrey and you're like, I get it now. I know who that is. I know who Princess Rhaenyra is. I know all about her. And when he tells the story, you have a little more depth to that experience. But how much does that extra knowledge add to your enjoyment of Game of Thrones, the show that you were originally watching? And you were invested in those characters, Joffrey and Cersei and Jon Snow, and we paused and kind of left them. And didn't you feel a little sad leaving them behind? And now that we came back to them, do you kind of forget what happened? Are you a little, I don't remember who's doing what? Maybe. If you're anything like me, that's happening anyway. And I would say that in The Dark Tower, you've got 4,000 pages and 8 books to keep track of. So going and reading a whole other book, yeah, it's a great book. And yes, there's a tie-in. And yeah, it's great in and of itself, maybe. But what is it really bringing to your enjoyment? Is it enhancing your experience here? Hey, this is all subjective. I guess people are going to debate with me. Debate with me. I love debating. Put it in the comments. But I would say that could be a pretty big detractor for some people. That could be a con. That could be on the con list. I guess somebody might put it on the pro list, but I'm putting it on the con list, okay? All right, let's keep moving. So con number 3, this momentum killer. So I mentioned 4,000 pages, 8 books. We're stopping to read other things. And I have an example of reading order thing that I think could kill momentum and just make people stop reading. So let's say you want to read The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger is book number 1, and you get The Gunslinger and you're like, yeah, I'm going to read The Gunslinger, I'm into The Dark Tower. And you're reading The Gunslinger and you're kind of like, oh, this is different. This is a little slow. This is a little something different than what I expected. Everybody's raving about The Dark Tower. I'm just not feeling it. That's a very common reaction to The Gunslinger. It's a very different book for Stephen King, and it's a very different book to the Dark Tower series. But let's say you finish it, and then you immediately pick up book 2 of The Dark Tower, because you're just going to read them through in order. And book 2 of The Dark Tower, by the 3rd page, a lot of people are just total converts because it's a different thing that's happening. And we have different voices and different characters, and we have humor, which is largely lacking in The Gunslinger. And we have action that is mind-blowing, earth-shattering action in the first few pages where you're like, oh, I get it. Now I understand why people love this series so much. This happens all the time. And then people are converts to the Dark Tower and they really are just in love with it. But let's pretend that we didn't read straight through. We were looking at an extended reading list and somebody put The Talisman after The Gunslinger. Now, The Talisman is another Stephen King book that's a lower end of the list for me in preferences, in reading order, or joy of reading. I find it also to be difficult, slow, long. So I read The Gunslinger, kind of like, I don't get it. And now I pick up The Talisman, and I'm like, ooh, this is more difficult, slow, long. And I find myself struggling to read it, and I'm just putting it down, and maybe that's it. Maybe I just lose all momentum and I'm out, and I'm like, this Dark Tower thing isn't for me. What a shame, because that book, I don't think has really much to do, at least The Talisman is part of a series, okay? I'm going to talk about that in a second, but book one, The Talisman, like, I get it. I understand why it's on the list of we're related to the Dark Tower, but you're really not missing a thing if you don't read The Talisman before you read the Dark Tower series. So, yeah, like, what a shame. We just lost you. You didn't have to read that book. You could have just went into book two and, like, been off to the races. So that's what I'm talking about here. And that could happen with any of the books on the extended reading list, depending on your taste and what you like to read. And again, King's writing is so different across different books. You're very likely to run into this at some point or another. And another con, I think we're on number 4, is that if you're reading the other King books as part of an extended reading order, maybe you're like looking out for the connection, and you're reading that book because it's part of the Dark Tower series and because you want to find what's the connection. Could that be taking away from your enjoyment of that book as its own thing, which it surely is? Is it distracting you from that story? Does that make sense? It's like a thing you have to do on the path to the Dark Tower instead of, I'm just going to read this book because I want to read it and I want that experience. So I hope that makes sense, and I could see that happening. So if we flip this around and say, well, what are the pros of just reading it straight through? I mean, a lot of the pros are the opposite of what we just talked about. So we lose all of the cons that I just told you if we read straight through. We don't have to worry about books that aren't as interesting to us, or Stephen King, different genres are not appealing to me. I'm not getting too distracted. I'm able to focus on the Dark Tower series and characters and keep track of what's happening. It is a lot, and usually by book 6, by 5, let's be real, by book 5, and I've read this series quite a few times, I'm like, oh, what happened back in book 2? Like, what are they talking about? Am I imagining that? I'm forgetting that scene. So we're having to deal with that a little bit anyway, even if we're reading straight through. But we're losing that extra distractibility, loss of momentum, perhaps. So we're just reversing all of those cons and turning them into pros if we say, forget about the extended reading order, just read the Dark Tower books. An extra additional pro is that if we only read the Dark Tower books from 1 to 8, then we have all of these other books to read if we want to that are related. And there's something particularly joyful for me about getting the little Easter egg after the fact. So for instance, I mentioned The Talisman, not one of my favorites, and the sequel is called Black House. And because I didn't love The Talisman, I kind of was putting off reading Black House. Like, I knew it was there, but I just wasn't very interested, wasn't picking it up. Read The Dark Tower a couple of times. Finally, at some point, I was like, I gotta read that one because I have to read all of it. Picked up Black House. It's a totally different book. If you didn't like The Talisman, chances are you will like Black House. It's just a different tone, feeling, voice. And the tie-ins to the Dark Tower in this book are much more obvious, blatant, spelled out very clearly for us by the authors. And so imagine my delight reading this after reading the Dark Tower series several times. It was great, and I was just delighted to see all of those tie-ins. Did I lose anything not reading that before I finished the Dark Tower series? Absolutely not. Not in the least. And so there is that kind of thing of like, oh yeah, I get it, Stephen King. Like, I'm in the Dark Tower Club and I see what you did there. And it was just a nice little surprise for me. It wasn't, I have to do it because I have to read things in the correct order. So I wanna read Black House. And it happens to have this cool little thing. So I just want to emphasize that and say that this is like Star Wars, kind of, sort of, where we have episode 4, 5, 6. They're released first, right? And then a couple of years later, we have episode 1, 2, 3. And hey, minor spoiler for Star Wars here. But there could be somebody that would say to you, well, you can't watch 4, 5, 6 first because we are introduced to Obi-Wan in episode 1. And so you really need to read that first in order to truly appreciate the story that's happening in episode 4. I bet most people would argue with me about that. Maybe not everybody, and there's probably a YouTube channel where people are doing that, but most of us would be like, no, you don't have to do it that way. Why not? Because we trust our writers. Because Obi-Wan presented to us, old Obi-Wan in the later 4, 5, 6, is his own person doing his own thing in that movie, in that moment. That character related to the other characters in that movie. And we're getting what we need about him to make it make sense. And that's it. And then when we go to episode 1, we're like, oh, hey, look at that. It's Obi-Wan and he's young and that's cool. And we know him and look at what he's doing here. He's like a totally different person with different people around him, blah, blah, blah. So it's like, that's the thing. Wasn't it delightful to you to do it that way? Am I making sense? Where are my Star Wars people? Do you want to fight about it? I'm not going to fight about it because I don't know that much about Star Wars. But I hope that's hitting as an example of what I'm talking about here. This joy in discovering after the fact, more information, more tie-ins, little Easter eggy things. It's just super, super fun for me. So I would say that's another major pro. So we're kind of saying, like, reading book 1 through book 8, we're ignoring the extended reading order. We're getting everything we need, just like we trust the writers in Star Wars to give us what we need of these characters in that movie, in that moment. We trust Stephen King. He's giving us a character, yes, that might have been in some other book that he wrote, but in this book, in the Dark Tower book, he's telling us exactly what we need to know about this person. And if there's any history or backstory that we need to know, he's telling us. He'll spell it out for us. It's complete. We trust him. If there were a book about that person that was so related to the Dark Tower, it would be a Dark Tower book, right? So I hope that makes sense, that we can just trust that we can read all of these books and not need anything extra from the outside universe, even though those little things are there. Also, less time. It's going to take us less time just to read those 8 books. And then you can go back and just say, oh, wow, now there's all these other books I can read. Or I'm going to go back and reread The Dark Tower and now insert the other reading. Whatever. Like, most people who read The Dark Tower don't just read that series once. It's pretty rare, I would say. And there's a reason for that. So you can do this in different orders in different times. You don't have to just pick one and that's it forever. Do it differently the next time. You do the extended reading order the first time. The next time you read it, just read the books back to back, or vice versa. There's no wrong way to go here. But I would say the pros of reading straight through, to me, kind of outweigh the pros of reading the extended reading order. That's for me. That's a personal preference. And what we're going to get to is that this comes down to personal preference and your enjoyment of Stephen King. That's how I think ultimately you can make this decision. Before we get there, though, the cons of reading straight through, I don't really think they exist. I mean, in the way that I'm framing things, we kind of talked about, well, you might be missing out on this little thing or this little bit of history of this character or something that happened to them in another story or origin. But I think I've made a pretty solid points that you don't need that we're getting everything that we need from our author as we need it. So I don't think there are any cons to reading straight through. So again, make your life easy and just go read the books. Just go read the books. Let's get to our takeaways. So how are you really going to make this decision? I've given you some pros, I've given you some cons, pros, cons. And now what are we boiling this down to? Well, I think it's like, what kind of a person are you? Are you familiar with King? Do you like King? Do you not like King? So this is going to come into play. And then what kind of a reader are you? So if you already have some decent experience with King, maybe you've already read some of the other optional reading, extended reading list books. You love him. You love what he writes. Reading King is a delight for you, and you have lots of time and you want to do lots of reading, and you want all of the information, or you think you want all of the information, then do an extended reading list. Just do it. But again, don't spend too much time. Like, just pick one and go with it. You really, nobody's going to really mess you up too badly on an extended reading list. So just pick one and go with it. If you are a purist, you just want the Dark Tower experience. You don't really know that much else about Stephen King, what he's written. You're not too interested in finding that out right now. You just want this journey, this epic journey. You're a fan of sci-fi, fantasy, and you've just heard this is amazing. You are not into making things harder than they need to be, or big homework assignments, or big projects that's spanning years and years. You just want to get to it. Get to the quest for Stephen King's version of the Holy Grail, the quest for the Dark Tower. Then you can just read the Dark Tower books in their published order. I think a big takeaway here is that reading the books on an extended reading list might enrich your experience, maybe. But not reading them won't take away from it. So there's a subtle difference there, because reading the books on the extended list might take away from your enjoyment of reading, like we talked about. But not reading any of these things, I don't think you don't know what you're missing. And what I'm saying is what you're missing is not that important, or else Stephen King would have put it in the books. Okay? So I think that's a big deal. And I want to think about this whole Stephen King universe where we know that things from books show up in other books. And nobody's out there being so vigilant, I don't think, maybe they are, about, well, you know what, like in Billy Summers, minor spoiler, I'm going to mention another book that shows up in Billy Summers, okay? So in Billy Summers, there's a mention of The Shining, something in The Shining that shows up in Billy Summers. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay. So I read Billy Summers, and I had happened to have read The Shining. And so when I got to that part, it's a very teeny tiny small thing. But I was like, oh, yeah, cool, an Easter egg. Yeah, I see you, Stephen King. That's cool. You know, it was just a nice little boop. And then we're done. It has nothing to do with Billy Summers and his story and what he's got going on. But it was just a nice little thing that happened. But nobody's out there being like, you have to read The Shining before you read Billy Summers, because it mentions something in that book. Nobody's doing that. You have to read Cujo before you read Fairy Tale, because there's a mention. You have to read The Dead Zone before you read It, because there's a mention. Nobody does that with these other books. Or maybe they do again and I'm just missing it. But if they do, it's not in as a pronounced directive way, serious way as it is with the Dark Tower. So I think that's interesting and funny, and it might just be because we're so passionate about the Dark Tower, and the connections are like they're fucking cool. Okay. So we just feel like we want you, the reader, for the first time to just love all of it and just get all of it and just bathe in the world of the Dark Tower. And that's what we want for you. So I think that's where some of that comes from. But just remember that nobody's really doing that with some of these other connections that definitely exist in really fun ways. What else? I don't know. Once you read the series, however you read it, you're going to be crying on the floor if you're anything like me. And then it's time to pick up and figure out what are you going to do with your life now. Probably you're going to go back and read The Dark Tower again, but do you want to read some of these other books afterwards, like I said, and just get the little extra hits of Dark Tower dopamine because you didn't read them as you were going through the first time? Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, I think that's it for me. I hope this has been helpful in helping you kind of sort out, why is it like this? Why is it like this? Do you have to do it this way? Absolutely not. If you do want to do it this way, I will have a video, my own take on how to do that. But for now, if you want to do the extended reading list, go ahead and do it. Sure. But like start. Pick a list. Make sure it has those, I think those 5 books I mentioned a little bit earlier. Those are the keys. I hope I'm not forgetting anything very important. I don't think so. I think those are the main keys. And then just start reading. And remember that the Gunslinger is not an indicator of the Dark Tower series as a whole. If you feel a little put off or confused by that book, keep going. And I would say definitely read the Dark Tower 2 after the Dark Tower 1, no matter even if you're doing an extended reading list, because I think it'll sink its hooks into you a little bit better. Okay, so I hope to see you again soon, and whatever the video is that I do next. I love being here talking to you about the Dark Tower on Dark Tower YouTube. Until we meet again, my Dark Tower friends, may you have long days and pleasant nights.